We were getting a lot of comments from people like, I guess your son has a free ticket into heaven. But I wanted to talk to our pastor, Pastor Adams, about that.
You know, when you read the scriptures, there's a story in John chapter 9, in which the disciples and Jesus are walking along, and they find a man who was born blind. And the disciples ask a question that was commonplace for that day. They asked, did this man sin, or did his parents sin that he was born blind? So the assumption was that if you were born with a disability, somebody sinned. And it was believed at that time by the rabbis that one could sin within the womb. So perhaps this child sinned in the womb, or his parents had sinned that he was born blind. And Jesus gives this wonderful response. He said, it was neither this man nor his parents that sinned, but this happened. This man was born blind that the glory of God might be revealed. And I look at these children who are born with disabilities, and I don't think it was a factor of God was punishing somebody, God was disappointed in somebody. I think God looks at these children differently than we do. And when he looks at them, they are opportunities for his glory to be revealed. And when I see children with Down syndrome, there is a part of the glory of God I see in each of them that makes me more human. It calls forth from me. It makes me stop, and it makes me think about what it means to be human. And they show us that. And I think the longer a parent lives into what was disappointment and pain and grief, but then they watch this child grow up, and they love this child, and they begin to see they see in this child the glory of God, their perspective begins to change. And I've ministered with many parents in our Matthews ministry who have talked about this, how hard it was when they first had the child, and then years later how they would not change it for anything, how grateful they were that they had this child. But when it comes to a child who's born with Downs, the question is, what does it mean to be whole? And if there are physical limitations, the Bible tells us we'll have a heavenly body that will be different than the earthly body, and it will not be bound in the same way as our earthly body is. I don't think it's impossible that a child with Downs might get to heaven and then they would be, quote, normal, but I'm not really sure what normal is, and I'm not certain that for many of these children, their normal is more normal than many of us who consider ourselves whole. We come to the New Testament, though, and we find story after story of Jesus' ministry with paralytics, Jesus' ministry with those who are physically ill, those who are blind, those who couldn't speak. And I love these pictures because Jesus could have just walked on by them. You know, he was a rabbi. He could have focused just on teaching. He could have said, all I want to do is preach good sermons, I want to teach. But instead, he seemed to have a heart that when he saw someone who was disabled, he would stop to minister to them. He had compassion upon them, and he touched them, even those that were considered unclean by the people of his time, the lepers, you know, who had a physical illness. But in all of these cases, we find Jesus reaching out to touch them, which tells me something about the heart of God. When we look at Jesus, Christians believe we see the heart of God, and that tells me that God has a heart for a compassion, a love for people with special needs. Well, we had in 1992, we had a family who visited our church who had a special needs child, severely, multiply disabled. His name was Matthew Joyner. And when this family visited the church, they said, you're such a small congregation. We had just gotten started. Said, you're such a small church, we wouldn't expect that you'd have any kind of ministry for our child. But inside, I knew we needed to start something for this child, and I told the family, we'll do whatever it takes to minister to your son. You tell us what he needs, and we're going to do that. And I went to our congregation, and I asked our congregation that next Sunday, I said, we have a child who has special needs, and I told the family, you're the kind of people you would do whatever it takes to minister to and love this family, and especially this child. How many of you will volunteer to give your time 1 hour a month at least in ministry with this young man? So he has someone with him during Sunday school and someone with him during worship. And hands went up all over the sanctuary. And that was the beginning of our Matthews ministry. And our Matthews ministry today has dozens of kids with disabilities, varying levels of disabilities. We have volunteers who love these kids and care for them during Sunday school, during worship. We have special events planned for them, fellowship events and recreational events. And one of my favorites is every year we have a graduation party for those who are graduating from high school. And it is the neatest thing to come to this party and see all these kids gathered around for lunch and to celebrate their graduation. And these are the kinds of things that we do, looking for ways that we can love these kids that we can allow them to shape our congregation. So we actually, they appear in videos that we have here at the church. We want them to be in worship so they also become a means by which God transforms our hearts. So that's not just us ministering to them, they're ministering to us as well. But one of the parents of a special needs child shared this with me and said it captured so well her experience in raising this child. And her son recently passed away. I officiated at his funeral, and she asked that this be read there as a way of capturing the experience. It's called Welcome to Holland. It says, I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make your wonderful plans. The Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may even learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The flight attendant comes and says, welcome to Holland. Holland, you say? What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. All my life I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would never have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills. Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they've all been bragging about what a wonderful time they've had there. And for the rest of your life, you'll say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever go away because the loss of that dream is a very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. And I love that because it captures so well, I think, the fact that the experience is different, but you've got to look to see what are the things in this experience that are gifts from God. And if you do that, that child becomes a sacrament, not only for other people, a means of grace for other people, but for your own sanctification, that your child becomes a vehicle by which God is working in your own life to make you the person God longs for you to be.